Ostrowski Stojanowski. Spasbo Bolshoi. Proberil Vashi Danye. Visye Rabochiat. Ita Bolshogo. Naplavia Zakovozov. Vozmozhiny. Friggin' Russian, eh? Anyways, good morning, Armando. I think we got Sean joining as well. Matrix Portal. Oh, I should join. What am I even doing? Shoot. This damn thing. Go ahead and join, guys. Yeah, so this morning, pardon me. Oh no, that echoes no good. This morning, I haven't really prepared anything. Like I said, the computer was down all day yesterday. That was a fun adventure, driving around looking for a replacement motherboard, and then eventually not actually needing it. So yeah, yesterday was a exciting waste of my time because the computer basically stopped working and managed to fix itself without me actually having to replace any core components. That proved kind of frustrating. So today, oh no, that pen is no good. Today I was just gonna pull up some properties and kind of take a look at a few, and we go through some analysis in real time and talk through the steps. It does occur to me, however, that maybe you have a property you want me to look at. So if you do, feel free to put in the comments or what have you, and I'll try and pull it up here and look for it, because that's all I'm going to do with some properties, maybe in Sudbury, maybe around southern Ontario. And there we go. Yeah, I hope you all had a nice busy week. And I'll say real briefly, like the stupid computer thing. That computer broke, and like my heart sank yesterday morning. It just didn't start, and it's an expensive computer. Not that matters much. More importantly, it's a computer that I do so much stuff on. Work. It is used for both work and entertainment. And when it breaks, you realize, oh no, I can't do stuff. I can't access my files. I can't access my media. I can't. Anyways, it all sucks. And I'm, pretty computer savvy, so I can fix it myself usually. Well, let's put it a different way. I've never paid the Geek Squad any money. Let's put it that way. So I'm pretty decent with computers. And, I started taking it apart and troubleshooting everything. And I got this feeling just like in the pit of my stomach, when you just absolutely don't want to do something. Like I did not want to try to fix this stupid computer yesterday. So I'm working on it anyways, because it's got to be done, of course. And, I pulled out all the different components and I've isolated what I think is the problem. Right. And so I had to go out, completely unrelated to the computer. And I figured while I was out, I'd go pick up the component so that when I came back, I could, fix everything. So I went out, and then I called Best Buy. And you can't call Best Buy. This is something I didn't know. I don't really go there very often. You can't call Best Buy because their phone system sucks. So I spent like 20 minutes on the phone trying to talk to Best Buy, if you can believe it. Couldn't do that, so I finally went to a Best Buy. And where all the Best Buy people apologized to me because they're like, yeah, our phones do suck. You can't call in. It's whatever. But anyways, they didn't have what I was looking for. So they sent me off to Canada Computers, as it were, to get the component. And which is probably where I should have started. But I was being optimistic that Best Buy had it because on their website they had the part I needed. And I know it's not something they usually carry, but I thought, okay, it's on the website. So I was trying to call, but anyways, so yeah, they give me the Joker face. Sorry, you gotta go somewhere else and send me off to Canada Pew. So I go over there and I find what I'm looking for. And I'm expecting this to be like a $200 part, right? But instead of being a $200 part, the only component they have that's compatible with my computer that I need is going to be a $400+ part. So it's like, oh, great. I got to spend more money than I was expecting and time and all this stuff. The whole day's being wasted, whatever. So I don't buy the part, whatever. Come back, start doing everything I need to do to put it in, and I double, triple check. Can I return this? Yes, I can return it. Okay, cool. So I'm doing all this. I get in there. I'm cleaning and scrubbing and just like uh, replugging and setting all the different components in the computer, make sure everything is good and happy and clean and ready to go. So that when I pull out this new component and plug it in, everything's good. Pardon me. As I'm doing this, it occurs to me there's a couple things that I was in a rush earlier in the day that I hadn't quite checked yet. I'm gonna make sure all those things are still working properly as well before I open up this thing and now I spent $400 because I can't return it. I do all that, and lo and behold, something fixes the problem. I'm still not quite sure what exactly, but something was, I don't know. I must have bumped it or something and caused something to come loose. And when I was rechecking everything, I must have plugged it back in. That's the only explanation I could come up with. And so I fixed the computer. The computer's working again. And I have to go return that component today. And I only want to bring this up because yesterday I was feeling really, really crappy about it. Not for any particular reason. I really didn't want to do it. I had other things to do. Yesterday was a bit of a busy day for me, and I just didn't need this problem to arise in the middle of my day, right? And really gum up my day, my weekend in a lot of ways, right? Because I usually will take some time on Saturdays to do the prep for this today, and maybe outline what I'm going to talk about and prepare slides if that's necessary, those types of things. So none of that stuff happened, right? Write up emails, etc. So I was very frustrated going through the process, right? Go to Best Buy and then be told, oh, the thing that we said was here is not here. You got to go there, and then going there, and the part that I was expecting to be $200 and $400, and all these various things, right? And it was a lot of negative surprises, is what I would say, right? Like I was expecting to turn my computer on and go to work, and instead I ended up with this big problem that took up my whole day, right? I was expecting to go to Best Buy and get the part, but instead they didn't have it, and I had to go travel across the city to another store, right? And then I was expecting that I had to spend this $400 with this replacement component, and then lo and behold, I didn't have to, which was a pleasant surprise, not negative one. And while all this was happening, I was thinking about this, and because I'm obsessed with real estate, I'm always thinking about real estate. And pardon me, there is a real estate investor who likes to say, his name's Ben Humble. He likes to say problems or profits. Matt McKeever does as well. The two of them, they work together. And what they talk about is how you, as the investor, are there to take on the problems that other people don't want to take on, right? And I was thinking about that yesterday because a lot of people do not know how to fix a computer. They don't want to know how to fix a computer. That's fine. I don't blame them. Geek Squad used to, anyways. I don't know. Computers are a lot better and they're less prone to failure these days than they used to be. But Geek Squad used to do a great business fixing people's computers. But I was willing to take on the challenge myself, and I just always having just because I'm into computers, right? I wouldn't try to fix my car myself. I'm not into that. I don't know how to. But because I know how to fix a computer, take on the challenge myself. And as a result, his slogan, "Problems with Profits," rings true in my life, right? Because if I wasn't willing to take on the challenge, I would have paid Geek Squad $200 so that they could poke around with stuff inside my computer and then have something fix itself without them realizing what they've done. And I'd be happy, they'd be happy, and I'd be let out $200. Instead, because I took on the problem, I profited $200. That much is clear. But what occurred to me was, I can't communicate to you. Like, I was very frustrated yesterday trying to get through all this stuff. And the frustration it's fleeting, right? It's temporary, right? And so it's something that you really have to think about, right? Like in life, um, we always have choices, and most of the time, the choice we're trying to make is to avoid as much stress and frustration as possible, right? Like to have a comfortable life, basically. Um, but we do at times choose to shoulder stress and burden and difficulty, right? And the example I'm going to think is when you go to the gym, right? Not all of us go to the gym for sure. I haven't been to the gym in a year and a year, I guess, since last end of last year. So yeah, about a year. Obviously with COVID, a lot of people haven't been. In 2 years, some of you may not be into the habit at all. That's cool. I fluctuate myself, but when you go to the gym and you lift heavy objects, or you don't even need to go to the gym, or you just lift them in your basement or whatever, right? Like you're voluntarily taking on the resistance of those weights, the difficulty, the frustration, or whatever, right? And you're voluntarily doing so because it's going to make you stronger or healthier or both, right? And I was thinking about that, in the context of real estate, right? Is that you can volunteer for frustration, the kind of frustration I experienced yesterday. You can volunteer for that in the form of real estate, right? And it's very good for you. It'll grow your capacity to deal with stress and frustration, right? Because there are levels to those types of things, right? And like my day yesterday was frustrating for me, but it wasn't like a super frustrating thing. It was just because all these things kind of came out of nowhere, right? But you can voluntarily take those things on and exchange those problems and frustrations for money, or for net worth, and for a portfolio for your personal gains. And I really was thinking about that yesterday. Like, yeah, days like this kind of do suck, but then you get to tomorrow, and I'm there now today, and you look back in the rearview mirror, and it's whatever. You kind of laugh about it, right? So, anyways, that's just something that occurred to me yesterday while I was running around like a chicken with no head, trying to solve some problems, and yeah, I managed to solve most of them. So at the expense of some time, but what can you do? So I want to analyze some properties, and I'm gonna take a look. Oh, go ahead, Armando.
No, I was gonna say, you mentioned if you had a property in mind. I was wondering, I don't know if you might buy it, but this the property, the triplex that you was going to put an offer on. Did you
Yes,
analyze that one?
the triplex. Yeah, sure. You want to take a look at that one? Absolutely. Uh, where is it? Sure. One second. Sorry, I just gotta get that one open. But yeah. Let's share this screen. And this one right here, 1560 Weller Street. Um, so for those of you who didn't hear Armando or don't know what he's talking about, I had a private conversation with Armando. I talked about putting an offer in on this property. I was considering buying it myself. Um, Currently, we're in the process. Like for me personally, currently we're in the process of shoot. Currently we're in the process of looking into refinancing one of the properties, and then probably purchasing a few more. So I've been working with our mortgage broker and trying to figure out what our options are. And this property, without talking to the mortgage broker, uh, fits really nicely into the budget. Right, like a $300,000 property is, you know, not that expensive, really, right? So it's a pretty good deal in the sense that you can get into this property for about $70,000, right? Down payment plus land transfer and all that stuff. I think. So let's go through real quick, and I'll tell you why it was that that I like the idea of this property. So, 1560 Weller Street in Sudbury, Ontario. I actually didn't check this weekend because I haven't gone on and looked at any listings, but I am pretty sure that this is still active. So if you wanted to, you could make the offer instead of me. Since I haven't made an offer, I'll explain why after we go through. So this property is a triplex. It's located in Sudbury. It is in the southern portion of Sudbury, closer to the lake. Kind of in that section. I don't know. Do I have a map here? Oh, I do have the map. So it is right in here. Boop, boop, boop. Where are you? Ramsey Lake. No, not Ramsey. It's this one. Sorry. Kelly Lake. So it's somewhere near Kelly Lake, right up above there. It's free advertising so I could look and get a rent there. Anyways, so it's located kind of slightly off of the like central Sudbury area. So this would be more of like a satellite area. I believe this is considered the greater Sudbury area, not just like Sudbury proper. But it is still a well populated area. Like it from the picture makes it look like it could be in the country, but it's not. It's right in Sudbury still. It's a triplex, and it has uh, three two-bedroom units. Right, so it's a triplex with three even two-bedroom units. They're all separated. Pardon me. So they all separate entrances, uh, and each one has washer and dryer built in, or at least hookups. Right, that's the thing. Now the listing says the property needs a bit of TLC, and I copied the listing into the analysis this time. So this is straight from the listing. It says it needs some TLC, but it's a great investment at that price. Blah blah blah. You can see when they prefer their showings. The rents are $1,000 plus water and electricity, $750 plus water and electricity, and $650 plus water and electricity. Sorry. When I say water, I mean the water tank rental. They have like the unmanned water system, so each unit has their own. So they all pay the rent for that separately, whatever it is, $50. You pay for the water. So let's go through this property really quickly. It's 300,000 is their asking price. It may sell for more than that because I would probably value it a little bit higher than that. But it is also Sudbury, so it's hard to say. $100,000 per unit is probably about the median per unit cost in Sudbury, right? There are some properties that'll still be below the median for sure, and of course a lot that are above to create the mean somewhere in that $100,000 to $125,000 per unit range. And we've seen that trending, right? 2 years ago we were talking about like a 75K to 100K range, and now when you're looking at listings, you're clearly seeing that the market has shifted towards a 100 to 125 per unit. And we're even seeing, I've seen properties where they're as high as 200 per unit or as high as 150 per unit. I am starting to see that, and in some of the better income producing areas of Sudbury, that might be justified. So, anyways, this property has these three units, and you can see the rents are all over the place, which tells me A, the units are not identical, which, yeah, that much is obvious, but B, that we have people who are in there and they're paying substantially below market rents, right? Because there's no reason that I should have a two bed and you should have a two bed, and what, your two bed has slightly better windows than mine, so I paid $400 less than you. No, I might pay a little bit less for sure, but not $400 for $350 in this case, right? So we know there's some room to grow the rent, so that's one of the things I'm looking at, and I'm going, okay, this property's got some potential, right? So if we look over here at our income and we just kind of roll through the analysis, I've got $2,400 a month in rental. That's what those three total up to. So that's almost $29,000 a year. So when I look at my expenses, right, I'm gonna have fewer expenses than that. So my mortgage payment works itself out to $885 per month. That is with a 30-year amortization. Okay, so it would be a little bit more if you only did over 25 years. My taxes, this property is $3,500 a year in taxes, so it's about 28. What is it? 2880, 28.8 per month. Insurance, I don't know. I obviously haven't gotten a quote, but for a property this size, probably looking at between $1,600 and $2,000, depending on some of the material factors of the property. It could be a lot higher if you have like really old plumbing in there or really old electrical. Either of those things would, of course, increase your rate. But I'm not expecting that. This property is old enough that you could maybe run into some old plumbing. but it's not old enough for like knob and tube or anything like that. So you shouldn't have that problem. You'd have to find out. Obviously, those things are things that they would have to disclose to you before you closed on the deal, right? So when I go through my other expenses, insurance, so electricity, obviously I don't pay for it because they're separately metered. Water, about $50 a month. I usually use about $50 of water up in Sudbury. It might be a bit more, but that's approximately right. And then gas. I like to put about $100 a month. Obviously, in the summertime they're not using gas, but in the wintertime, you use it pretty heavily. Depending on how well insulated the house is and everything, this is something that maybe could be higher or lower. You do have a little bit of control, right? You can always like have um, cellulose blown into your attic and that kind of thing to try to like reduce your heat loss and potentially reduce your gas bill, right? And then of course property management. So property manager we work with in Sudbury charges 8%. I already know that, so that's their cost right there. That's gonna work up to $192. And of course landscaping. Landscaping like the gas. Mostly I'm talking about snow removal here. Um, as you can see from the picture of the property, it looks very green, so you may require some additional landscaping. I don't know. I do know that like the driveway area, a lot of the like land surface is for cars. It's not like grass or anything like that. So you might find this is relatively low maintenance in the summertime, but it's hard to say because there aren't great shots of the property. A lot of them are kind of like an upshot where you can't really see the details of the ground so well. Is what it is. But I estimate $1,000 for landscaping on every property, and I know it's almost never right. It's just a nice golden number. Um, these things they fluctuate up and down. It tends to be snow removals decently expensive, especially if you require salting. Salting is where they really get you. Salt is expensive. Let's put it that way. They charge a big markup on it, and it wasn't cheap to begin with, and they use a lot of it, and that's why salt is quite pricey. So in total, all my expenses total up to about $2,000. You can see on the screen, 2033. Which I'm actually going to zoom in just in case. There you go. So 2033, and we already know I'm making $2,400 per month in income. So my bad. Wow, that's so weird. We can see that we should get some, right? So now we get to withholding. So of course, these are the things where I'm not spending this money, but I am earmarking it because one day I will spend it, right? One day I will have a vacancy. One day I will do repairs, but not today. Today it's going in my bank account. I've just flagged it as, hey, don't spend this because you're going to need it later. So I'm getting my vacancy, $48 per month. I'm getting my repairs and maintenance, and I put 7.5% of my income should go to repairs and maintenance. So that's $180, right, per month. And I'm putting aside tenant consideration. I've told you many times, you don't have to do this. I just do it. I like to have that little bit of extra in case someone throws spaghetti in my common area, which, believe it or not, is a thing that happens. Or I told you the other week we got the problem dealing with the stupid garbage, right? We're dealing with garbage because the tenants are idiots, and of course that's costing money, right? So instead of me sitting here being sour and saying, "Oh, that money's coming out of my profit," at least maybe for the first little bit, it's tenant consideration. That's the only reason I do that. That's you don't have to, but whatever. So I add all those things up. That's $288 each month, right? So I add that to my gross expenses, and that's gonna give me my total expenses. And so when I subtract that from my gross income, I'm going to get my net cash flow, right? And in this case, that's $78.80, right? So I'm going to make a small profit on this property as is, right? As it is priced, as it is tenanted, as the situation is, we make money. There are some assumptions in here that might make us not make money, right? Maybe insurance is a bit more expensive, landscaping, that kind of thing. But in general, we're in that realm of this property will probably cash flows where it's at, right? And so if we look down here at our breakdown, right, our 5 year return breakdown, pardon me, um, you see assumptions about doing this as a burr. So I'll explain some of the active appreciation stuff after. But you can see for cash flow, cash flow is about $1,000 per year, which kind of sucks, but it means this property will sustain itself, right? And that's very, very important for an investment. Principal recapture, right? Because the mortgage is not very large, you don't recapture that much of it, but about $6,000 per year of mortgage payments are yours in equity. So that's not too bad. So already this property is making $7,000. And remember, we're in it for 70. So already we're at 10% return, and we haven't factored in appreciation. If there is appreciation, of course, very big if, I put my property value gains, you can see there, at 2%. So I'm assuming pretty standard, nothing remarkable appreciation. Obviously, here I've said 2% is $8,000. Now, for those of you who are good with the quick maths, you'll know that 2% of $300,000 is not $8,000. So what is wrong with there? Then it's math, and so that's where I'll talk to you about the active appreciation. In this property, it needs some TLC, right? So there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with the units internally. If I showed you the pictures, you'd be like, oh, this is a pretty good property, but it needs paint. It needs paint throughout. And I would probably replace the kitchens in 2 of the units. One of the units looks like it was recently renovated, has nice flooring. The kitchen looks pretty good, whatever. The other 2, they need some updating. And so I figure you're going to spend about $20,000 per unit in here. What I did put in my rehab costs for renovations is $60,000. Figure you'll spend about $20,000 per unit in this property to really bring it up to market standards, so to speak, right? And once you've done that, you should be able to raise your rents to $1,000 a piece, maybe even to $1,200 a piece, because that's around the Sudbury average. And if you could get $1,200 times 3, that'd be $3,600 per month in rental income, which would be an increase of $1,200 over what we're making right now, right? And since what we're making right now is already profitable, you know that most of that money would also be towards your profit, right? And so that's why I really see the upside. I also think that when you have this property updated to full market standard and you've put in the tenants that correspond to that market standard, then you could value this property at around $125,000 to $150,000 per unit. I'm going to split the difference and pick $133,000. I have 3 units. That's $400,000. And so that's how I'm arriving at that valuation. That's my ARV, right? And so when I get down here, right, if we go back to our return breakdown, you'll see here I've got $33,000 in active appreciation, right? Because I figure if you spend $60,000 to bring the property up to market standard, plus the time and effort to get the tenants turned over and paying market rent, then the property should be worth around $400,000. Of course, it costs you $60,000 to get there, so you're going to net $33,826, right? That's how that's going to work, right? And so I factor that in as active appreciation, and also my passive appreciation on that ARV, right? Because if it's going to passively appreciate after I've made it nice, it's going to passively appreciate on the ARV value. And so when you put those things together, you can see this property is a real win. Even though the cash flow number is not very impressive, between my principal recapture, my passive appreciation, and my active appreciation, I have like $48,000, right? Almost 49, 48,500 dollars in potential first year return on investment. And of course, I only put 68,000. No, sorry, that's a total lie. sorry. I put 120,000 into it, right? Because I put in 68 down, and I put 60 to appreciate it. And from that 120, I made back almost $50,000, right? That's a really good return on investment. And in fact, I've got to now do the math, because I'm not even sure what that's going to be. That is a 38% return on investment, right? That's pretty good. That first year, I had to do the calculations because here it'll give you your average, but this is a little different because averaging it now across 5 years. Still, an average return on investment of 32% is pretty strong. And my analysis here has not factored in one other thing, right? You've gained that $1,200 in the ideal situation, but even if we go unideal and we say you only gain $900 or so, right? You gain that additional rental income, and you can plug almost all of it into cash flow, right? So if we add on an extra $900 per month, right, to cash flow, and we multiply that across 12 months, we're adding on $10,000 of cash flow, which means now my return goes from $48,000 to $58,000. I'm basically returning $60,000 year one on the property I invested $120,000 into to 50% return on investment. You don't get those very often in life, so that's why this property is appealing. And if my credit situation were a little different, I'd already have an offer in on it. But that's yeah. Now, in reality, your cash flow doesn't actually jump up $1,000 or $1,200 because if you refinance, because you don't have to, but if you refinance, then you're going to be paying that much more on the mortgage, and that's going to eke out another $400 a month or so off of that increased rental income, right? So you're not gonna quite get that as pure cash flow. Or alternatively, if you had to borrow the $60,000, depending on the interest rate you pay, you're gonna have to factor that in as well. But you can see you could actually pay quite a bit for that 60K and make this deal work, right? Like at 10% per year for $60,000, you'd be paying $6,000, right? $500 a month. And you can see, since we're going to increase the rent by around $1,000, you have to give up $500 of it to do so for the first year. That is, you could do that and pay 10%, which might sound like a rather outrageous interest rate, and yet still have a profitable investment here, right? Just because the numbers work so well. And you can see, right, when we extrapolate this out to year 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, in my analysis, I never factor in the increased rent, just because that's not something that this particular spreadsheet does well. But you go to year 2, if we just assume that our rent stays static, right? We top another 15,000 onto the 48 we made the first year, another 15 onto the 63 we made the second year, etc., etc. So by year 5, we've made $110,911, right, back on this project that we initially invested $120,000 into, right? Because we put in basically 68 to buy property and then 60 to fix the property up. So we're in for 128. We're getting out 110 in 5 years, right? This property is basically paying for itself. And again, I have not factored in the 10K per year or call it 7K per year in cash flow. In reality, this is more than a 100% return on investment over 5 years. But again, the math of the sheet is not quite accurately reflecting that. And then when we extrapolate this out to 30 years, you'll see the sheet does something weird, which is my return on investment, my average return on investment goes down, right? Which does make sense because of what the sheet's doing, because my calculation is front loaded with this 30, it's almost $34,000 in active appreciation, and you're not getting that in the later years, and so that's bringing down your average return on investment. And what should be happening here is that, yeah, you should not be getting this number, but you should be getting, again, $7,000 to $10,000 at the top here, right? And then by year 5, right, like rent won't still be $3,600. It might be $45 by then, right? Like it'll have gone up, maybe $1,500 per unit by then, right? So that'd be $4,500, and that's just going to keep climbing, right? So I always try to point this out, especially if you're using my spreadsheet for analysis. The sheet works great. It'll tell you exactly what's going to happen in that property this year. It does that just fine. As it extrapolates out to the future, this stuff is here to give you an indication of what the future is like. It's not here to be perfect, obviously. It's just a forecast. And obviously things could go up or down because you might incur more expenses than you predicted, right? And then you're not going to make this return, right? And alternatively, you could have more income than you predicted, right? Things could happen. Things could appreciate rapidly, all kinds of things. For starters, my assumption here, the built-in assumption that you're getting a 2% property value gain, that does happen for sure, and that is the average from Sudbury. Like those are CMHC numbers. I didn't make that number up. But when's the last year you saw a 2% gain, right? And I'm not saying that as in, well, assume you're going to get 5%. No, don't assume that. But I'm saying 2% is totally speculative. It could be 2, it could be 5. Last year it was 25. This year could be 0. Right? There are even years where it's -1, -2. Right? So it's not a number that you can greatly rely upon, but in the current market conditions and the current economic climate, it's hard to imagine a scenario where you don't see some passive appreciation unless if interest rates go through the roof, right? Like that's the only way you could have a situation like that. If interest rates climb really sharply, then they're going to reduce the purchasing power of the public, right? And as they reduce the public's purchasing power, that's going to mean fewer people can compete for each property. And that means obviously your demand is going to be diminished. And what do we know about supply versus demand, right? When demand goes down, then your price falls, right? And so that's the thing to look out for, right? Is yeah, if interest rates really start to climb, that could cause people to stall out of the market and not be able to purchase things. Now, what's interesting about a market like Sudbury, in particular, in a property like this one, right, is like this is a pretty affordable property. This is an affordable property, even if interest rates are substantially higher, right? And now, no, I'm saying affordable, not profitable. Affordable. At higher interest rates, this property is still very affordable. It may not be profitable, but it is affordable. And that's a very important thing for people to consider, right? Because as interest rates go up, right, uh, it's a good concept to understand and appreciate in economics, right? Is a substitution good, right? So to give you an example, you go to the grocery store and you like to buy butter. I don't know, you put butter on your toast and your popcorn and stuff, and you like butter. And one day you go to the grocery store and the price of double butter has tripled, right? So you're obviously not going to buy the same amount of butter as you used to. You might still buy butter, but you'll buy less, right? Now, because you're a clever human being, right? You're going to look for a substitution good, right? Because you like butter and you don't want to stop consuming the amount of butter, but now that the price has tripled, you don't really have a choice unless you can find something that you can't believe is not butter, right? Like, so to use that, I don't know if that's a margarine or what it is, but I can't believe it's not butter, which is, I guess, not butter. You can start buying that stuff, right? And it hasn't tripled in price. So you can now buy, a little bit of real butter and a whole bunch of I can't believe it's not butter, and you kind of end up in the same place, right? So this is a substitution good, and the world is full of them, right? Lots of examples. Uh, uh, Electrical power plants used to use coal, now they use natural gas, right? So they can also use nuclear or solar or wind, or there's a lot of substitutes for producing power, right? Your car, obviously, we all grew up with ICE cars, right? Internal combustion engine cars. And of course, they're all now slowly being supplanted by battery electric vehicles, BEVs, right? As people kind of get on the wagon with Tesla and these other companies come on board, we're going to see more and more BEVs and fewer ICE cars, right? And so substitution goods, that's a real thing. They exist all over the place, right? If you look in Toronto, right, a market that's been heavily distorted by, well, it doesn't matter why, but the market that's heavily distorted, right, where property is really, really expensive. Well, when people can't afford things, they look for substitution goods, right? So, what is the ideal, like the highest value to most people, not all, but to most people, in terms of like real estate? It's a house with some land and whatever, right? Like a detached single family home. Well, a lot of people live in condos, right? Well, condo is a substitution good for a single family home, right? Because it can be a single family condo. You don't get to have the yard, but you might get extra security. There are things that are good about condos, which is why they're tricky as a substitution. Because sometimes they're the preferred, but condos for the most part they're a substitute good, right? For the house that the people can't afford. And so in Toronto, I can afford a $400,000 or $500,000 condo. I can't afford a 1.5 or $2 million house, so I substitute the two goods, right? Now with real estate, of course, you can make the substitution in a lot of ways, right? Because we can change what type of property we're buying, right? From a house to a condo. We can go from buying buying houses and condos to renting, right? Apartments or renting out houses, right? We can also substitute location, right? I can substitute living in Toronto for living in Barrie, right? Or I can live in Milton, or I can live in Oakville, whatever, right? So there are a lot of different things that we can substitute, right? Now this is very cool because if interest rates go up, which essentially means that prices are going up, then now people are looking for substitutes, right? So obviously, in a high interest rate market, right? 2, 3, $4 million single family homes in Mississauga are not going to be very popular because people can't afford to finance them, right? You might see a proliferation of more affordable condominium buildings that people can afford to finance, right? Um, Alternatively, what you might see and what you often do see is you'll see an exodus from the city, right? So, and you're seeing this right now. I mean, you're seeing it in Toronto right now. They're building properties, in East Gwillimbury and up near Wasaga and out near Orangeville, and there are all these community developments. I can't think of any of their names right now, but all these developments that they're building ostensibly for like young people, starter homes, that kind of thing, that are away from Toronto because they can't afford to live in Toronto, so they're building them somewhere where it's more affordable and they can substitute. you're probably not going to see very many people substitute from Toronto to Sudbury. It's too far away, right? In terms of a place to live. Although you may see a little bit, but just not very much. What you will see though is you will see a substitution of investors, right? Now, in some ways, that is already what I am and what we are, right? In some ways, I would prefer to invest in Toronto. Sudbury is the substitute good because I can't afford, or at least I feel that affording in Toronto would be much more difficult and perhaps quite a bit riskier than affording investment properties in Sudbury. And so that's why I choose to invest. As interest rates go up, more people will be forced to confront the fact that they maybe can't invest in a market like Toronto, at least not profitably, and they may turn to a market like Sudbury. So you may actually see that even in market conditions that you would think would um, depreciate the value of this property, that the value may increase because of its relative affordability in the marketplace, right? Relative to the alternatives, this may appreciate. And then, of course, there are some things that are going on in Sudbury. I just bought, what is it, the wedding bands, right? Because I'm getting married next year. So we just bought the wedding bands from some company. Oh, actually, I've shown you guys the company, Monet. They make the solid gold jewelry and stuff like that. So it's solid gold wedding band, and they were saying that it's sourced from mines basically in Sudbury. So they're getting their gold from Sudbury, and Sudbury has a gold mine that think it might the sorry they've had gold mines for years, but they have like an expansion that's been going on, and I think it might be online now. I haven't actually been paying too close of attention, so I'm not sure if it's online yet or if it'll be sometime early next year. But they've been working on it. I think it was about 680 jobs or so that they brought to the area for this gold mine expansion project. And in theory, if those things are doing well, and of course the mining business is a very tricky business, right? Because theoretically, the price of gold falls, that mine might become unprofitable and they may shut it down. But I'm not expecting the price of gold to fall. You probably aren't either. Um, Basically, if those businesses prosper and they succeed, there's going to be demand, right, in that area. People are going to want the jobs, they're going to want to work, so there's going to be demand for people up there. And you may actually see that even as interest rates bog down a place like Toronto, um, which is very, very, very debt dependent, right? You might find that a place like Sudbury flourishes, right? Because they're so close to a primary resource in terms of the mining, right? That they're not nearly as debt dependent as a place like Toronto, right? Like a lot of the money that you're getting in rent from some of these guys who are mining or some of the people who are supporting those miners, like you're one or two steps away from the production. Financing is not coming into play in that economics, right? Whereas in Toronto, I mean, a lot of people like they don't have a job without finances, right? Because there's nobody buying the product they're selling without somebody to financialize the transaction, right? There's a lot of that. I hope that that's an easy to understand sentence because I recognize that I might not be. But anyways, this is 1560 Weller Street in Sudbury, Ontario, and I really think it's a fantastic deal. I really do. Obviously, there's a lot of details. There are things that I don't know. There are assumptions that have been made. You cannot just go into this blindly and say, "Hey, I'm buying this property. We're good." Aaron said it was a good deal. You can go in and buy it because Aaron says it's a good deal, and you'll probably do all right. Like, but ultimately, it's always was it buy at your own risk. And I say that because some of the material details might be different from the way they've been advertised to me or the way that I'm advertising them to you, right? And we always have to do our due diligence. But I really, really like this property just as it's cheap, and also it has potential. Now I don't think it'll sell for 300. If I'm being honest, I think they probably priced it like that to try and create a bidding war. Let's see if I can find it here. It might already have an offer on it. Oh no, here it is. Yeah, it does. There's a conditional pending on it already. Uh, Again, not surprising because it's come on, guys. It's not surprising because the the money the pardon me the numbers just made sense, right? Um, what was I gonna do? Oh, I was gonna show you a couple pictures just so you can see. This is what I mean. So if you can see on your screen right now, there you go. This is what the inside of the property looks like. you can see it needs a little bit of work, and that's what I was talking about. You know, you might need to put $20,000 in TLC. The walls need painting. That's the primary thing. You'll see it in this shot. You can see there's a lot of patchwork and just a whole bunch of BS going on in the walls here. You're gonna need to get someone in to paint that stuff. You see it in this room as well, right? And then if I skip forward a little bit, you see that a lot of them shows me. Oh, they're behind that TV as well. You see it, and then you can see here. Uh, Here's one of the more updated bathrooms. Looks pretty good, I would say. And then here's one of the less updated kitchens, right? This looks pretty bad, I would say, right? So this is the kind of thing you might fix up, and that's where a lot of your money is going to end up going, right? You see here, this is one of the nicer units, quite nicely. Someone's got all their stuff on display there. I guess this is they use it like their closet. I think that's more of a bedroom, but anyways. So that's Weller Street, 1560 Weller Street, and you can see right, like here's a triplex selling for 449, right? So it's $150,000 per unit, right? And if you see here, I don't know if you can see what did I do with it. So if you can see here on the map on the left side, no, you can't see that. Or the screen's not updating. But okay, there you go. No, yeah, if you can see on the map right now, you see it's highlighting where this property is located. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said it was above Kelly Lake. It's not. It's above Ramsey Lake. Sorry. So that's where it is. And you can see where like Central Sudbury is, right? And you can see it's on the outskirts. It's in the greater Sudbury area again, right? But you can see where this is located. So obviously now I'm going to compare it to this triplex, which is located now. It's going to move in a second on the screen. You're going to see that's located like in the heart of Sudbury. So this is more core Sudbury, and so the valuation totally makes sense here. But you can see we're averaging $150,000 per unit for this 219 Albinson Street, right? And so that's kind of what you're aiming at. And actually, this property is not a legal triplex because one of the units is an in-law suite. Here you can see it's a fourplex actually, 327 Victoria Street. Here we'll look at because it's new. Ooh, 339 Victoria Street, sevenplex. Maybe I'll look at that one actually. But this fourplex is $500,000, right? So that's $125,000 per unit valuation, right? And that's again just the way the market's been trending. Very, very nice. In every market, you're going to see the per unit valuation slowly trending up. One thing to keep in mind, right? Because I think that economic correction is looming, and I don't know if it's looming 6 months out or if it's looming 2 years out. I just know that it is looming, and I hope it's not a source of anxiety for you. But if it is, something to keep in mind, right, is that the rental market is a great market. To go back to substitute goods for a second, right? So if I said like the highest and primary ideal is to own your own property with your own land, right? Like everybody wants to be a king, to use the British royal family or the Saudi royal families as examples. Notice that royal families always own a bunch of land and nice properties on them, right? Everybody wants to have that. If you had the power, you would have that, right? Alternatively to that, we'll all take a modest living on a normal house, right? And I'm comfortable with that. You probably are too, right? And so that's kind of the goal, right? A lot of people, their aim in life, or at least eventually one of them, is to acquire property and have their own home, right? And so real estate obviously has value, right? Everybody needs a place to live, and they're first going to try to buy it. If they can't buy it, they will try to rent it. If they can't rent it, they will try to find somewhere where they can buy or rent, right? And so the great thing about the rental market is that when the economy starts to squeeze people, right, you might worry about your tenants making their rent. And to some extent, that is a problem. It's something you have to worry about, and especially in commie Canada, they're not going to allow you to evict your tenants. So if your tenants, depending on what kind of people your tenants are, you could find yourself having a bit of trouble in the situation. But essentially, if the market collapses, right, people will start to lose their jobs, right? Now, your tenants might be some of those people. And because they lose their jobs, they may no longer be able to afford your property. Now, in an ideal world, they leave. I'm going to talk about ideals because when we get the government involved, things get a little bit trickier. The explanation gets a bit more complicated. But just to illustrate the point, they're going to leave, right? Now, I don't know. Me, I have a job. My job pays me well enough that I can afford a house. I pay my mortgage, whatever. I'm doing well. I'm not like your tenant who's renting from you. They're maybe starting out or whatever. They don't have a good job, whatever it is. No. I'm doing well, right? Of course, the economy goes to pieces. I also get fired. Right? I also get laid off of my job. So the fact that I was doing well doesn't even matter anymore. Now, me and the other person were in the same spot. But I had a mortgage. Banks don't like to lend to people who are unemployed, right? So after a couple of months, like I got to get out from underneath this property if I'm not going to be able to replace my income, right? And maybe I find a job, but just doesn't pay as much money, right? So I can't afford my current lifestyle anymore. I've got to move. Well, I may have taken a job that's, let's say it's a 40% pay cut over what I used to make. So let's say I was making $100,000, now I'm going to make $60,000, right? Um, okay, well that's great. Your tenant was making $60,000 and he got pay cut. He's now making 40, and so now that he's making 40, he can't afford your place anymore. So he's gone. Goodbye. But now I, who would never have looked at your property before because I was making 100K and I wanted to buy my own place, I now have to move, and I probably don't want to buy a place because I just got burned on the place I just owned, and I am not planning to stay at 60K. I'm trying to get back to my 100K. So this for me is quote unquote temporary. So I just need a place to rent for a year or two while I get back on my feet, right? And so into your life, you the landlord, I walk saying, hey, I now want to be your tenant for the next year or so while I get myself back on my feet. And so paradoxically, when the economy crashes, right, as the economy tightens up, and it can do this in a variety of ways, and every situation is unique and brings its own challenges, but in general, when the economy contracts, right, the landlords, assuming that you're not landlording like super high end or super low end properties, right? Because those both come with their own challenges. But assuming you're just kind of marketing towards you, kind of your middle, your median renter kind of a thing, paradoxically, they see the demand for their property increase, not decrease. And so typically, when the economy does poorly, rents increase, right? And so that's a very neat thing, right? Like people are going to be competing for your thing because it's cheaper, which then makes it less cheap, right? Very good for you, the landlord. Now, if you lived in a place like Texas where you can evict someone the next day and send out the sheriff with a gun, um, this is better for you, right? Because obviously you can get rid of the tenant who has lost the ability to pay for your property relatively quickly and get in a new tenant and start, getting the higher rent. In Canada, like I said, it's a bit messier. You get the government involved. It's going to depend on where they are in the term of their lease, right? And it's going to depend on the government and what the government is doing, right? Obviously, um, during COVID, we should have seen a bunch of people become homeless and a bunch of people move around from one type of job to another, and we probably should have seen a pretty steep increase in rents. Uh, but the government stopped landlords from evicting people who weren't paying. So the government essentially forced landlords to subsidize people who, some of them were unlucky and a lot of them were lazy, who found themselves without work for a portion of the COVID response, right? And you can tell me you think that's a good thing, bad thing. I don't care. You're welcome to political things. I can tell you about the economics. That is, you can't avoid the things that I just said. They cannot be avoided. They can only be distorted, right? So what the government did was they didn't avoid the rent increases. If you go ask tenants, they will tell you rents have been going up. But what they do is they delay it and they forestall it and they make it so that it comes in fits and starts. Right? Because you may have a property that's been locked up for the last 2 years and you've been losing money on it, right? Because you couldn't get this tenant out and the landlord tenant board was closed and blah, 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 blah. So finally you get out from underneath this nightmare that you've been living for the last year or so, right? And guess what's going to happen? Two things, right? You as the landlord, actually there's three things. First of all, some of these landlords are going to quit being landlords. They're going to take their product off the market, right? They're either going to say, no, I don't want anything to do with this, and they're going to sell it, or they're going to say, no, I don't want anything to do with this, and they're going to convert it into just a normal, like, single-family home or whatever, and maybe they'll rent it that way, or maybe they'll just move into it themselves or a family member or something, right? They'll remove the stuff from the market. Two, you're going to get landlords who, after they've been in this situation, they're going to say, screw it. I'm never doing that again. I'm going to be super discriminatory, super choosy. I'm going to make sure I don't care what the law says. I'm going to make sure my tenants aren't going to screw me because the law is obviously not got my back, right? And so those people are going to become much more discriminating, much more discerning about who they allow into their property, which is another way of saying they're going to reduce the supply, right? Because they're not going to make their property available to the majority of renters, the majority of tenants, right? They're going to try really hard, maybe spend extra money on screening to make sure they get really good tenants in the future because they've been burned and they've learned their lesson, right? Thirdly, the third response that you might find, maybe they don't care so much about the tenant thing. Maybe they didn't learn their lesson there, but they feel that they need to recoup the costs that they've incurred for the last year and a half. So they're going to do some quick maths, right? And they're going to figure out, oh, well, if I increase my rent by, I don't know, let's say 25%, then that should, over the course of maybe 2 years, that should get me back to where I would have been, right? Now, obviously, they can't just arbitrarily raise the rent to whatever they want because there's a marketplace, right? And obviously, if the rent is too high, their property is going to sit empty. So there are factors that constrain them in terms of how much they can increase the rent. But some people are just going to say, F it, this is what I want to do, right? And what you may find is that depending on how supply and demand lines up, their effort increases. People might take them up on those offers because they may not have alternatives, right? And so the price gets pushed up eventually, anyways, because the fundamentals are just there, right? So it's very valuable to understand that as an investor that you're putting yourself in a position where your product is going to be at kind of peak value when things are melting down for people, and you just need to understand and be prepared for that, right? And then make sure, obviously, when the meltdown comes, like it's very important just in real estate investing in general to work with a float, right? To make sure that there is cash on hand to cover expenses when your tenants aren't able to, right? Because obviously the dream, the goal, the plan is to have the tenants cover all the expenses for sure. But you need to have a few months of a buffer, right, in between you and the tenants paying the expenses in case they can't for a month or two. That's the thing that may happen. But as long as you have budgeted accordingly, and this is part of the reason why we take vacancy as a withholding, right, among other things. But as long as you've budgeted accordingly, then when these times come, and yeah, there will be difficulties. There may be a month where you don't get your rent, what have you. When these times come, you're in a position to prosper from them, right, and to really take advantage. And that's true. That's true property, no matter what your market is, right? When the market goes sour, then rents are going to increase, right? And so if you're in a property that is already profitable before anything goes sour, right, that is already cash flowing, then you can only expect your cash flow to increase. Assuming you're doing the work of trying to refresh your tenants and everything. And again, obviously in Ontario, it's not super duper straightforward because the government really does put thumb on the scales to try and kind of distort the market. And it's so unfortunate because that distortion, I keep saying distortion, that's such a like abstract thing to say. What I mean by distortion is what the government is really doing, what they've really done is they've reduced the supply, right? People are neither building nor investing in as rental properties as they would build and would invest in if they didn't think the government was going to screw them when it came to disputes with their tenants. Now, as a result of people not building that supply, what do we know about supply and demand? Right? So in Ontario, you could probably have rental rates that were like, I don't know, let's call it $800 a month for like a 2-bedroom, right? You could probably have that. But because the government has distorted things so heavily, people are not investing to build the supply so that the supply can ameliorate the demand and bring down the price to that $800 mark. So instead, we have an average of $1,200, $1,300 for a 2-bedroom in this province, right? And that's what that distortion does. So it's easy to look at that and be like, oh, well, it's good. If you only slice time by this one narrow section, and you just go, okay, what are they doing? And you go, oh, well, nobody's getting evicted. And they're just destroying it. It's easy to see that and think, okay, there's no negative consequence of this strategy, right? But when you actually dig a little deeper, you see in the broader context, right? When you zoom out and you get away from this one individual situation, you actually realize that no, every single person, and again, I don't mean this pejoratively, but like these are the quote unquote poorer people, right? Like Conrad Black and and Doug Ford and people like that they're not affected by the rental rates in Ontario, right? So these are the poorer people in Ontario who are paying potentially hundreds of dollars more per month in rent than they need to because the government is quote unquote protecting them from predatory landlords, right? Like it's such an insane situation where like anyways, it's the government doing what the government does, which is saying that they're protecting people and hurting them. That's my opinion. You're welcome to it. It's free. Um, anyways, thank you for your time. I'm gonna stop. I've been a little long-winded, and I'm sorry for that. But I don't know. I really like that deal, and Waller Street, and obviously, I'm pretty passionate about all this stuff, and I want to really get across some of the things you can expect when the market takes a downturn. Because I do think that's something. I think it's something that people are thinking about. I don't think it's something that necessarily we're expecting to happen, tomorrow or anything. I'm not certainly, but it is something that's looming somewhere nebulously in the future and something to worry about. And I think the future is not guaranteed for any of us for anything. You know, you could work out every single day and be hit by a bus or something and die. And so if you work on your fitness, it's no guarantee of your health, right? If you work on your finances, it's no guarantee of your wealth, right? That is also true, unfortunately. But I do think people who work on their fitness usually tend to be fit, and people who work on their wealth usually tend to acquire wealth, right? And real estate is one of the oldest, most tried and true methods of generating wealth. I've seen the magic with my own eyes, and I absolutely love it, and I hope you all do too. And I just wanted to highlight this very cool fact about real estate in terms of the how rents can travel against the market, right? The unfortunate corollary to everything I said, of course, is that when the economy is doing really, really well, and the people you're renting to who are making 60K are getting raises to 80 and 100K, then they move on, right, and they go buy their first home or what have you, right? So and that can cause your rents to fall a little bit. So it can move in the opposite direction as well, right? But obviously, we're not at that point in the market cycle, so talking about it is unnecessary. Um, does anybody have any questions or comments before we call it a morning? All right. Well, I want to thank you for joining me this morning, for your time, for taking the time to be here and to listen. Obviously, this week didn't quite go the way I usually try to conduct things, and so I'm sorry, that I wasn't myself better. But next week we'll definitely try to get back on track. I'm hoping to kind of put together a bit of a series, and I don't know, it might take me a few weeks to kind of get my feet under me, but hoping to kind of go on a series and kind of highlight some of the different markets across Southern Ontario and maybe do some analyses in each of those markets and kind of look. I'd like to maybe, I don't know, on a yearly or maybe a semi yearly basis, kind of do like a market report so that we can all kind of look at where we're currently investing. Looks like there are opportunities to invest, right? Because obviously, um, wasn't always investing in Sudbury. Right, markets change. When I started investing, the markets we were looking at were Hamilton, Sudbury, KWC, and really all of those have done really, really well. You can definitely still invest in them too. Like not like you can't. But then we identified Sudbury where we felt like the opportunity was maybe a little greater than it was over there, and that's where we've been investing for the last maybe 2 years. But obviously the time will come when Sudbury's kind of reached its apogee, and you'll have to find somewhere new to look at. So I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks, it might take until next year, but I'm hoping I'll be able to put together some numbers and some research and kind of get these different markets nailed down. And maybe once a week we can do a different market each week to be our focus until we've kind of looked at all of Ontario and see what's happening. So that's what's coming. Again, thank you for your time. You guys have a wonderful day and all the best this week. I'll hopefully see you all next week.